Hey guys, Caleb here from CDBS Studios, and today I'm bringing you a little bit of a passion project that I've been working on for a very long time now. So, I am somewhat of an MCU fan. Uh, if you ask any of my friends, they will tell you the exact same thing that I am a huge fan of superheroes, and the MCU is kind of the thing that got me into Marvel. So as a result, I thought it would be a good idea to go ahead and rewatch all of the MCU films recently, and as a result, I tacked on the TV shows and the specials. And once I finished, I decided why not make this video. So today, I'm going to be doing a ranking video of all 47 current installments in the MCU, including the movies, the TV shows, and the specials. So let's get it going. At number 47, at the very bottom of the list, I have She Hulk Attorney at Law. Now, I'm going to admit I am not the biggest fan of lawyer comedies, so this show was probably never going to be the thing for me. But when it started out, I actually didn't think it was that bad. I genuinely enjoyed my time with the first episode and enjoyed a decent amount of the second episode. But then the series kind of fell off after that point. Every episode after that just kind of felt like a chore that I was doing, and the only reason I stayed involved was because I knew a Daredevil episode was eventually going to be in the works. And I remember on my first watch of the series, I actually originally thought the series was only 6 episodes. So when I got to episode 6 and it wasn't the Daredevil episode, I found out that I still had like 3 more weeks of She Hulk, and that kind of infuriated me. And the show also thinks it's more clever than it is. The She Hulk has this whole thing where she breaks the fourth wall, and there's another character we're going to talk about way later on this list that does the same thing. But the problem with those very two different characters is you have to set it up that it's a joke. The entire premise of the show is that Shield does not want to be taken as a joke, and as a result, she can't take a joke. So everything that happens in the She-Hulk show is either so serious to the point where it's boring, or so serious to the point where I'm bored out of my mind. And the She-Hulk also thinks they can get a pass for its bad writing, as they have this whole thing in the final episode where She-Hulk fourth wall breaks out of her show onto the Disney lot to talk to the writers of her show and to Kevin, who is a robot who runs the MCU apparently. And she basically goes off and says that everything that's happened in her entire show is stupid and that the show should be different. So here's my question, Marvel. Now that you've pointed out to me that your show is bad and you recognize that, why am I supposed to then care about your show? Like, the fact that you call it out does not give you a free pass. If you knew your story was bad and your writing was bad, you should have adapted to that and then made a show we all would have enjoyed. And as a result, I didn't enjoy it, and it's going to take the bottom spot on this list. At number 46, I have Eternals. Now, this movie is so frustrating to place this low because on my first watch of it, I actually didn't hate it that much. But after going back and rewatching it all these years later, I have picking up on a lot of the problems that this movie has. This movie suffered from a very big issue where it tries to introduce us to 10 new characters, centuries worth of new lore for the MCU, and then tell a great story all in the 2 hour runtime of a movie. Now, this is one of those MCU movies that I think would have benefited so much more from being a Disney Plus show, because you could give us a Disney Plus show that's 6 episodes, that's now 6 hours instead of two, and allow yourself the time to introduce us to our 10 new characters and tell the story you want to without the restrictions you have. And as a result, because this movie feels so whiplashy at points, we're like in the present, and then we're suddenly like 5,000 years in the past to explain what we just talked about in the present. And as a result, this movie also thinks it gets a free pass to cast Salma Hayek in a role where she's killed off before we even meet the character. So we only ever see her in flashbacks. Plus, they have this weird thing where they don't really know who the villain is of this movie. For the longest time, we think it's the Deviants, and then they pull a twist on us where the Deviants aren't actually bad. They're more or less being manipulated in the same way as the Eternals are. So they set up now a fun idea of, oh, we have our Deviants and our Eternals who are both being manipulated by the Celestials. We can use that as a story point, right? Nope. Instead, we're just going to take two of our Eternals, flip them into villains, and so it's the Eternals versus that villains. And then also Thena versus we have Thena versus a deviant, and then we have our main Eternal versus a Celestial. And it just feels like they didn't really know how they wanted to end their story. So they ended up with a film that feels like you get tonal whiplash at so many points. And as a result, I've had to knock it down so many points because it just fails in the sense of introducing us to these new characters and then making them interesting to the point where, like other MCU characters, you want to see them again. At number 45, I have Thor Love and Thunder. Now, this movie I have a little bit of a special attachment to because I did get to see this in a Dolby movie theater, which was a such great experience. But apart from that, this movie kind of suffers from a lot of problems. While Thor Ragnarok pushed the boundaries of what you can do with comedy in a superhero movie, this movie struggles with the problem of it doesn't know when to stop joking. As this movie is almost 75% just jokes, and it takes away from the serious scenes because there basically are no serious scenes. In fact, they even go out of their way to make a joke that then just doesn't ever come up again. Like there's this scene right near the beginning of the movie where Jane and Valkyrie are preparing to leave New Asgard for the adventure, and they joke about what they're bringing, and Valkyrie jokes about bringing a Bluetooth speaker. We never see this Bluetooth speaker ever again. And I think this problem kind of arises for me personally is that the opening for the film has Thor teaming up with the Guardians of the Galaxy as following up from the ending of Endgame. And so as a result, the movie sets a tone in the opening that's fit for the Guardians of the Galaxy. And then when the Guardians of the Galaxy depart from the movie after the cold open, that tone then is stuck. It sticks. And the tone doesn't really fit Thor. So as a result, the movie ends up just feeling like they put Thor in a Guardians film and then for some reason got rid of the Guardians. And then the other big problem this movie has is they got Christian Bale, one of the best comic book movie actors out there, to play their villain, Gore the God Butcher, one of the best villains in Marvel Comics. And then he spends the entirety of the movie not on screen. He's off with he's off with the captured New Asgard kids, and we only see him like 3 times in the entire movie, which sucks because again, they got a great actor to play a great villain and then just shuffled him off to tell jokes for 2 hours, basically. At number 44, we have Secret Invasion. Now, this is a show that I think would have worked so much better if it ended up as an Avengers movie. The idea of the Secret Invasion plot storyline in the comics was all about how Marvel heroes turn out to be someone we don't think they are. And it's this whole plot line about who is real and who is not, and they tell this really fascinating story in the comics. For the show, however, they decide to make it a spy espionage show, or at least that's what Disney Plus calls it, at least, with Nick Fury taking on the Skrulls, and as a result, all the Skrulls feel like they're either their powers are really dumbed down, or they're just really stupid with their actions. And as a result, they make really bad decisions of killing off Talos and Maria Hill for seemingly no reason, and they just never really give full development to the other characters they keep around. And they also think of the worst problem ever where they take a character who we didn't even know until this show, and then in the finale, give her literally the powers of every single Marvel hero up to this point, and then have a big sky battle with our main villain who also has all these powers. But then once he's defeated, they're now in a position where they have a problem. They now have a character who could literally solo every character in the MCU because they have their powers. And then they shuffle her off to be some kind of twist villain later down the line, which doesn't feel like you can make this character villain because how do you write that as a good story? Because she could literally solo everybody. And it just feels like this show had no clear kind of grounding force, and it almost felt like Marvel was trying to force something that they just trying to force another show onto their service. And as a result, it just doesn't feel like it fits anything else in this franchise. At number 43, I have Black Widow. Now, this movie has the biggest issue ever of they finally gave Black Widow her own solo film, but it was after the character had already been killed off in Endgame. And so, and apparently this movie was created back around the time of Civil War where it does take place in the timeline and where it belongs, but Marvel postponed it because they didn't believe that Black Widow would sell enough toys. So as a result, this movie comes out wackily out of place at the start of Phase 4, and as a result, there are no stakes because you know our characters are all going to survive because they eventually make it to Infinity War and Endgame. And then they they apparently, when making the movie, did not have a clear script locked down in any way, shape, or form through the entirety of production. So as a result, the VFX, especially in that final battle sequence, looked so awful because no one could commit their time to making them because the script changed like while they were shooting. And as a result, they also decided to basically have so many things that just feel out of place in this movie. Like you have Taskmaster, who is a great Marvel villain, shuffled off to just be a mind controlled like robot, basically. You have this you have these awkward tonal moments that just feel out of place in the entire story. And then you have moments that try to set up, Natasha's, I guess, goals in that into Infinity War, but we already saw those. So it just feels like you're giving us backstory for stuff that nobody asked for. And as a result, this movie feels wackily like it came out at the wrong time, and that's because, well, it did. At number at number 42, we have Thor: The Dark World. Now, this is a movie that I actually remembered being a lot worse than I remembered. Uh when I went back to rewatch this for this marathon and I saw Thor: Love and Thunder was next on my rewatch, I half considered skipping it. And and then I watched it because I was like, "Hey, might as well." And then I found myself enjoying it more than I thought I was gonna. But it's still not that great of a film. Apparently, back when this film was first talked about, they had the idea to kind of tell this Romeo and Juliet style story in Asgard with Thor and Jane and make Hela the main villain. But Marvel decided not to do that idea because Hela would not sell them enough toys. So they switched the villain to Malekith. Now tell me, Marvel, how did the Malekith toys sell for you? And Malekith is just one of the most boring MCU villains I think we've ever gotten in the MCU. He probably is the most boring because he's just one of those villains that's basically just, I'm going to destroy because I can. There's no motivation, there's no underlying layer of morals there. It's just, I want to destroy this world because I can. And as a result, the movie just feels so boring. As a result, there's almost no stakes to fight our villain because the villain's not saying anything important. And then the final battle for this movie is almost borderline unwatchable because they have that awful red filter placed over it that basically makes all the action unseeable, and it just makes the whole film like that we were building up to the final battle, and then the final battle is like one of the worst shots in the entire film, and I can't even enjoy that properly. So this movie just struggles for having for having a great idea when they were planning it, but then when they made the execution, it just fell through in practically every conceivable way you can think of. At number 41, we have The Incredible Hulk. Now, this film is, I would say, generally underrated. I think that this movie um has a clear idea for what it wants to be, and it's very clearly a pretty good story about Bruce Banner. He gets his powers, he can't control them, so he goes on the run, trying to find a way to cure them throughout the entire film, and then eventually it leads to a confrontation with the Abomination. Now, the Abomination never really gets that much of a development throughout the movie. In fact, he mainly is just the guy General Ross hired to take out the Hulk, and when he fails, he becomes Abomination. And so as a result, that always just feels like kind of weird that we didn't really set up our main villain really well. And even a lot of the moments like around the central romance and all that don't feel as great as they could be. And the movie also tends to have a problem when it's trying to um make itself set up other things. So at this point, Marvel's starting to figure out their connected universe and that. And as a result, Edward Norton played Hulk in this first film, but then got recast as Mark Ruffalo later on. And apparently there was a bunch of problems with that. And apparently, even Edward Norton had something in his contract that he got to do a pass on the script, which also probably plays into some of the weird issues that this movie has. And as a result, also because Mark Ruffalo played Hulk for so long, I always just see Mark Ruffalo as the Hulk. And so Edward Norton in the role always kind of drives me the wrong way, as I don't really see him as Bruce Banner. And as a result, this movie kind of struggles in my mind because I want to love it really good, really badly, but at the same time, I can't give it as much sympathy as I want to. So at number 40, we have The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, a show that very, very much struggles with a lot of things. The show, I mean, at its core, is trying to be this big event of Sam Wilson becoming Captain America. That should be the simple premise of this, and as a result, the show also finds its way to wants itself to drag so much to the point where there's like 15 different plot lines that all kind of are at odds with one another. Because you have the main plot line of Sam trying to be Captain America, then you have the John Walker stuff, the Flag Smasher stuff, Bucky's stuff, Zemo's stuff, Sharon's stuff, Isaiah's stuff, and there was also remnants of a cut pandemic plotline that you can still find in the show, and it's feels like the show struggled. I think this is one of the few instances where a one of the Disney Plus shows would have been so much better as a movie, because just make this a movie, and as a result you can cut like so many of the mumbo jumbo dragging this movie down, and it would have brought it to way new heights, because so much of the show is either just really boring or it's just empty statements that the characters are saying that do nothing for the entire storyline. And the one plotline of the show that I think was handled really well is the stuff with Isaiah Bradley. Whenever it's doing that whole thing about how Isaiah Bradley was a super soldier and how what being a black Captain America means, the show is really good. In fact, I wish the whole show was just that. Instead, it gets lost in these all these other subplots that just hurt the show in its advance. I firmly believe that this show and Eternal should have switched. Eternal should have been the show, and Falcon and the Winter Soldier should have been the movie, because it's Captain America. You know it would have sold tickets. At number 39, I have Iron Man 3. Now, this is a pretty harmless Christmas movie, and it's got a lot of fun moments in it, but there are a lot of things that really drag it down. For starters, the villain. Now, I know everybody likes to dog on this movie because it has the Mandarin plot twist that they don't really like, and to be honest, I don't like it either, but I don't think it's as bad as everyone says it is. It's kind of a funny idea of having an actor play this threatening villain on TV, And then when they find him, he's not really that threatening. That's a funny idea and kind of works in the context of the story. But then the problem with that is once they've wrapped up that Mandarin stuff, they then switch our main villain over to Aldrich Killian. And Aldrich is just not a threatening or even good villain to replace the Mandarin with. So as a result, there's the twist. I don't find that bad, but the problem is they took a great villain and then substituted in a villain that's not great, because then we have Aldrich Killian who reuses that plot line that you've seen in hundreds of other movies, where we have someone who admired our hero, then was let down by them, so now has scorn for them. And you've seen it before, you know how the story plays out, and as a result, Aldrich just feels kind of cookie cutter in a lot of those ways. And then there's also that pretty great final battle sequence that has all the Iron Man armors, which is still a really good MCU battle. And it just has so many great themes. But the other thing that drags the movie down for me is that this movie, in a way, kind of ends Tony Stark's arc, because when they were making this movie, they didn't know if Robert Downey Jr. was going to be continuing as Iron Man. So they kind of finished up the character in this movie so that if he didn't want to come back, he could be done. But because he did come back and got a way better finale to his arc in Endgame, this movie kind of feels like they give an end to the character and then he just shows up again like 3 movies later. So that also is one of the few things that also kind of drags this movie down in my eyes. At number 38, we have Captain Marvel. Now, this movie has a lot of good items in it. Like, there are all the stuff dealing with past Nick Fury and how they got the Tesseract. Phil Coulson was a delight to see again. And I really do like the idea they tried to play with, where we have the entire movie, we believe the Skrulls are the villains. And then they pull a reveal in the third act that the Skrulls are actually good, and it's the Kree that are evil, and kind of has Captain Marvel switch sides, which is a good idea. But the other problem is, no matter which side you think is the villain, it doesn't really matter, because Marvel struggles with a problem when it comes to Captain Marvel of she is just too powerful of a character, and they don't give her villains that are on the same power scale. So as a result, Captain Marvel basically can solo every single character she comes across, to the point where there's no stakes in any of her battles or any real threat, because like even in the final battle, like our main villain basically comes up to her and is basically like, put away your powers, let's fight hand to hand, and then she just blasts him, and that's the end of that fight. And then she flies up into space to take out 50 Ronin ships without breaking a sweat. So this movie then, so as a result, this character just flops because there's no emotional core or stakes to this character, to the point where you either feel sad for them or where you're scared they might actually die going into these battles, which is a thing that always makes these battles elevate. And there are also, like I said, a bunch of other good moments in this movie. I love seeing a older version of the MCU where they still like things like Blockbuster Video and that, but that is not enough to save this movie that really has some very, very glaring problems. At number 37, we have Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Now, this is a movie that I have very conflicting feelings about. On one hand, I really enjoy it because we get Sam Raimi directing an MCU movie, and this is not Spider-Man Sam Raimi. This is Evil Dead Sam Raimi. So this is a really good horror film and has some really good scares in there. But when it comes to the superhero aspect of it, it kind of falls through in a lot of places. Um, a couple things that I don't really like about the whole overall story. I think Wanda was done really dirty in this movie, and I get a lot of people like her turning to evil arc and thought it was really good, but when you look at it, the arc Wanda goes through in this movie is almost the exact same as the WandaVision arc, but done worse. This was due to the fact that the people working on a WandaVision and the people working on Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness never talked. So they never knew what each other's plans were for their 2 projects. So as a result, we just get Wanda's arc twice, just done worse once. And then they have this whole MacGuffin quest with America Chavez that turns out to be really weird because the whole movie, it's she can't use her powers, and then in the final battle, Doctor Strange just goes, "Oh, you could always use your powers," and then she just does, and it just comes out of nowhere. And they also have the Illuminati scene, which is okay, but in a vacuum. Like, yes, it's fan service cameos and fan castings that we've wanted to see, but they don't add to the overall story. Like some of the other multiverse movies we're going to talk about later down the line, they use their cameos in a very effective way to further their stories, and I just don't think the Illuminati do that in this movie. And when you give me a movie with the title Multiverse of Madness, I want to see a Multiverse of Madness. Instead, we spend the entire movie in like four universes, and the most Multiverse of Madness you get is like a 30-second clip, which is kind of a letdown when you deal with something with a movie like this. At number 36, we have Avengers Age of Ultron. Now, I know this is a lot lower than a lot of people put this film, but I am just not the biggest fan of Age of Ultron. Now, there are some good moments in this movie. Like, I really enjoy Wanda and Quicksilver. I think they're great additions to the team. Ultron is a very threatening villain and actually has some very real points to say. And there's some pretty good moments in here about the Avengers, just bonding now that they're team members. Like, you have the whole scene where they try to pick up Thor's hammer, all the jokes they crack in this movie when they're just hanging out. Those are some good moments. But on jokes, this movie's only form of comedy is running gags, as they have the language gag in this one, Tony bringing stuff to life, and other moments like that are just like jokes that come up once in the cold open, and then they keep coming up, and by the like 15th time they've said it, it's it's played out, and it's not great. On the flip side, there's also some good jokes in this movie, especially when it comes to Tony Stark. I mean, RDJ is just great at that character. And most stuff with Tony Stark in this movie is done really well. Like the Hulkbuster fight, ooh, that's peak. But other than that, lots of the other moments in this movie either drop really low than the first Avengers movie. And in my eyes, I just can't put this one too high because I just wanted more from this a team up movie of this degree, and I don't feel like I got it. And that's kind of the biggest complaint that I can really say about this movie. And I will give it this though. It does introduce us to new Avengers that are better later down the line because of this movie. So as a result, I do have to place this one a little higher because looking back, it is also the starting point for a couple of my favorite MCU characters. So I'm just gonna place this one a little higher and hope that it just works in the overall scale. Just to give you guys kind of a idea of where we are currently in the list, we are currently about to cross the threshold of everything we've talked about up until this point. I would go thumbs down negative on, and everything we're going to talk about going forward, I'm going to go thumbs up positive on. At number 35, we have Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantum Mania. Now, this movie is one that struggles for a lot of reasons. The very easy problem, which is kind of cleared up now, is that they decided that an Ant-Man movie was going to be the place where they introduced the big bad for Marvel's multiverse saga, that being Kang. But then they have him get defeated so easily by Ant-Man's ants to the point where people started asking, if Ant-Man's ants can do it, why are we going to need the Avengers to stop this guy? And that problem's been kind of cleared up now that Doctor Doom's now going to be the main villain, but that problem's later. And then also the movie thinks it's clever in the sense that it tries to hide the fact that Kang's the main villain of the movie, because for the entire like first hour, where until we meet Kang face to face, nobody wants to say his name. It's like he's a ghost figure, like he who should not be named. But like everybody walking into the movie knew who he was. In fact, nobody even in the movie even seems scared of him. So why would you not just say his name? And he was in the cold open with Janet. So there's no point to hide his name. Everybody knows your villain is. You're not being clever. And as a result, they also have a lot of bad moments in this movie when it comes to Ant-Man and the Wasp and a lot of their relationships and stuff. Plus, also, they kind of eliminated lots of the components that made the first two Ant-Man movies funny and enjoyable. That being the X-Cons, which are just nowhere in this movie, which is kind of unfortunate. And as a result, this movie kind of fails in my eyes as an Ant-Man movie. But recently, I actually switched up my view and thought about this movie less as an Ant-Man and the Wasp movie and more as a stature movie, Cassie Lang. And it's way better when you look at it from that angle of Cassie learning how to be a leader, learning how to be a superhero. That's all handled, I think, pretty effectively, but it's buried in an Ant-Man movie that fails at being an Ant-Man movie. At number 34, we have The Marvels. Now, this is a movie that I remember being, that I think suffers from a big issue of it feels like a movie made for TV. Now, that problem probably comes the most from the fact that two of our three main characters were introduced to us on TV shows. We had Miss Marvel and Monica Rambeau, which I guess Monica was in the first Captain Marvel film, but she gets her powers on WandaVision. So already you have to watch two other movies to understand half of our main cast. And then once again, they struggle with that problem of they have Captain Marvel, who is a super strong character, and then they don't give her a strong villain to match. So the character just feels like they can solo every problem they come through, and they're only held down by the fact that they have like Miss Marvel and Monica on the team now, who don't have mastery of their powers. So we have that struggle going. They have some really weird moments involving the Kree in this movie where they actually set up in the last movie, which I thought was really cool, the Supreme Intelligence being this big villain, but Captain Marvel killed them off screen. And that's why our main villain of this movie is mad. So you took a way more interesting villain again and then got rid of them just to put a worse villain in their place. And then they also have these really tonally whiplash moments that feel like they're made for TV, like a whole musical segment, these weird training montages that don't really feel like they belong in this movie. And this movie just then gets bogged down to the point that it feels like I'm watching a movie that Marvel meant to show on Disney Plus that's like almost like a team up of all these characters like the Defenders was, instead of a big team up movie on the scale that like things like the Avengers should be. Because that's what this movie I think is trying so hard to be. At number 33, I have Miss Marvel, and this was a show I desperately tried so hard to love because teenage superheroes I think are just really fun and they add a new perspective to the world of superheroing, which is something you can't really get with the big like billionaires and soldiers and stuff. But so the episodes of this show where Kamala gets her powers and starts protecting people around Jersey, that's really fun because that's Miss Marvel. That's what she's supposed to be. But then for the back half of the season, they then uproot her out of the area that she's meant out of Jersey to take her to India, Pakistan, and then they have this whole episode about the partition of India that has like almost a documentary about it in the episodes of Miss Marvel, and then they have Miss Marvel time travel back to it using her powers for some reason, and it just feels so weird because it's almost like the show took an entirely is like I'm watching an entirely differently show when I make it to like episode 4, which I don't think should happen. And then they blend it with this plot about the clandestines, which are kind of our main villains, but then the show does something that I didn't expect, but they killed off the clandestines in episode 5, and then episode 6 has Kamala return back to Jersey to fight a racist DODC agent. So now all of a sudden, you basically have 2 seasons of a show that you smushed into one and gave us. So it feels like there's weird tonal whiplash if we have the DODC plotline set up in those first 2 episodes. We then uproot to this clandestine plotline for half the season, and then we just return to that episode at the very end, which just doesn't feel right. It feels like they wrote this show to be 2 seasons almost, and then when Marvel said you only get one because we're going to use Miss Marvel in this movie, they were forced to shove them together and find a fast, easy way to make it work. And I don't think it does work as well as I think Marvel thinks it does. At number 32, we have Captain America, the First Avenger. Now, I am, for one, not a war film person. So this movie doesn't really connect with me on the sense that it does with everybody else because it's a good set piece being set in World War II. You have Captain America get his powers and go off to fight the Nazis and all that, which is a really um good set piece. And then they blend it with these cool plot lines about Bucky and Red Skull, and it all works pretty well together. But I've just never been the biggest fan of war films, so this film just doesn't resonate with me as well as it does with everyone else. But it is the start of one of Marvel's biggest characters, so I do have to give it a little bit of points there for introducing Chris Evans, who originally did Human Torch of all Marvel characters, and brought him into this movie to be Captain America, and he nailed it, which is saying a lot because Captain America and Johnny Storm could not be more different from one another. So the easy switch just shows the amazing acting that Chris Evans is able to pull off. And then you have also a great love story. Peggy and Steve works so well. And that scene on the plane when Captain America is going down and he has a talk with her saying he's going to make their dance, it's so emotional because, well, for those that know, he does eventually get back to the dance, but it takes so much longer. And then you have all these other great moments where you see his friendship with Bucky, which makes his sacrifice so much more sad. You have Howard Stark in this movie, who is also a really fun addition to the cast. And all of it, I guess, just blends together to make a pretty enjoyable experience. But I just feel like there's better from the MCU that we still have to hold coming down the line. At number 31, we have Iron Man 2. Now, after the first Iron Man came out and was such a big hit, Kevin Feige pushed Jon Favreau to make Iron Man 2 and only gave him basically a year of production, where Jon Favreau said they needed at least two to just get the script right. And as a result, you can feel that in the movie. As this movie has a really big issue that I always notice is that the our main character doesn't know they're trying to stop the villains until the villains are literally punching him in the face boss battle style, because we set up the whole idea of Whiplash, who Tony doesn't even know exists. He then meets him at the race in Cairo. I think, is it Cairo or is it Mexico? I don't even really remember. It's at this race, and Whiplash fights Tony. Tony defeats him, and then Whiplash intimidates him in a prison cell, and then Justin Hammer fakes Whiplash's death, and then Whiplash spends the entire rest of the movie in a lab, only showing up in the final battle with his new suit. And then Justin Hammer is just not that big of a villain because he just intimidates Tony in the opening segment and then just disappears from the movie and then also spends the entire rest of it in a lab. So Tony never knows he's trying to stop a villain until they're punching him in the face. But moving away from the villain, the story here is also really cool about Tony learning how to make a new element and kind of connecting with his dad to do it. You have the whole stuff with Rhodey becoming War Machine, which is handled pretty well. And of course, this is our introduction to Black Widow, which is also a pleasant surprise, and she just is great in this film. And as a result, this movie is very conjumbled, I guess is the right word, as it has a lot of really good moments, but also you can really feel that, yeah, Jon Favreau probably needed that extra year to really iron out the details of his story. At number 30, we have Echo. Now, Echo, I think, is trying so hard to get back to, I guess, the Defender Saga era of Marvel TV shows, because the Defender Saga was a pretty great collection of shows for how mid some of the seasons were. They were pretty good overall, I think. And this show was trying so hard to showcase that energy of bringing a Marvel character back to the streets. We have a TVMA rating and Kingpin, obviously. So there's a lot of stuff here that's trying to reminisce those shows. But at the result, we also only get 6 episodes like all the other Disney Plus shows instead of the typical Defender Saga like 13. So as a result, Echo's story feels kind of really smushed together and almost feels like a almost this show is an example of why every Marvel character doesn't need their own spin-off, because you can give great characters great moments, but some characters just don't need their own stories. They can be paired with someone else and their stories can be great together. And I think that's just the problem with Echo of I think it's really great in a lot of areas and it's definitely a big step up from some of the MCU Disney Plus shows, but at the cost of I think there's so much more that we could have that was on offer from the idea of this show that then never came through in the final product. And it just and I just can't put it any higher for that sole reason. At number 29, I have Thor. Now, this is another very interesting movie as back in phase 1, Marvel was trying their hardest to kind of ground the MCU stories and kind of make them feel like they exist in our world. So as a result, this movie introduces us to Asgard and has this whole great idea of this Norse mythology where we got Thor, Loki, Odin, and all these space battles. And then the movie has a switch up where they banish Thor to Earth and it becomes a fish out of water comedy, which just feels so awkward because you introduce us to this whole cool, amazing world and then you put Thor in New Mexico, which just feels so totally different. And I get that that was like the point of the story of like, to have Thor learn worthiness, and which is a great story, but it almost feels like something you would do in a sequel because I feel like the first movie would be you would introduce Asgard, and then in the next movie you kind of do this kind of story where you go out of Asgard. I don't know. That just might be personal preference. But other than that, this movie is amazing. The casting, for one, is amazing because Tom Hiddleston and Chris Hemsworth do Thor and Loki so great. And you have to remember, back then, they weren't like top tier actors. That's what these characters turned them into. And now I can't really see any other people really doing these roles because Tom Hiddleston and Chris Hemsworth just embody those characters so well now, and it just kind of feels like they are Thor and Loki. And Loki is also just a great villain. I mean, he's probably my favorite MCU villain, not gonna lie. And you pair that with some great moments, like you have the trio in New Mexico, the scientist with Jane Foster, Eric Selvig, and Darcy. They are great additions to this movie. And you even have some pop ups from characters like Hawkeye, who is always fun. So I think this movie is great, but at the same time, like I've said for some of the others, I can't really put it too much higher. At number 28, we have Spider Man Far From Home. Now, this is a movie over the years that I have desperately tried so hard to love, but I just can't bring myself to do it. This movie has a lot of really big issues that contradict the great stuff. And that great stuff is the main thing of taking Spider Man out of New York and placing him in Europe. That is a fun idea. Of we get to see how Spider Man operates in a city like Venice or London. That's a fun idea, and we get to see kind of alternate places around the world, which is always fun when movies do that. And they also have a really great story here about Peter's relationship with MJ because this is also a great time to explore that because especially the last Spider-Man movie didn't even use MJ as a love interest. So it's kind of fun to explore that idea and also kind of they use it in a really fun way where they really showcase the high school crush developing into a relationship, which I think is something that the other Spider movies never really got a chance to do. So that's always really fun. And plus, you pair it with some really great actors. John Favreau as Happy shows up here, who is amazing. You got the entire kid actors who are fun, and Tom Holland as Spider-Man, who is also amazing. And but the big bad thing that this movie always drags me down for is its villain. Mysterio is on paper a great Spider-Man villain and probably one of the best. But my biggest issue with this movie is when it comes to how he was executed. As this movie has him be uh has him use illusion tech to be a fake superhero. And the reason he's doing it is to make Peter give up these multi-million dollar glasses that for some reason Tony Stark left him so that he can use his technology to become a fake superhero to do what exactly? In fact, his plan makes no sense because he's mad at Tony Stark because he took his technology and renamed it Barf back in Civil War. So as a result, he's not even mad at Spider-Man. He's not even really a Spider-Man villain. He's against Tony Stark, who is dead at this point. And it just feels like there's something that's missing there, and it just suffers. It just sucks because it just feels like they had a great idea for a character, but his plan makes almost no sense. And then, like, say he did succeed and he did fool the world. What was his plan? Kang the Conqueror comes to Earth, and Nick Fury is like Mysterio, we need you on the front line. Where are you? And he's like, nope. What was his plan then? Like, this movie frustrates me like so much because I want to love it, but every time I see the villain's plan or think about it, I just cringe so hard. At number 27, we have Werewolf by Night. Now, this is a very different type of MCU project because this one is deliberately trying to kind of be reminiscent of a Twilight Zone episode, and you feel that. And it's great for that instance with the black and white and the whole story they're telling about this whole monster hunter group that then has a werewolf in it, and Man Thing who are all great. But the problem with being a Twilight Zone inspired special is the story favors story over characters. So we never really get to learn much about our characters. It's basically just like the classics you need to know to basically understand who they are and kind of why they're doing what they're doing. But we never really get any development for any of them or any kind of things like that. It's more or less here's what's happening, and that's just kind of what you're supposed to watch. And as a result, that always just kind of feels like there's something missing from this special that would have brought it up a lot higher because the story's amazing. I think the story's great and a great Halloween special, but then you you want to know more about the characters in your story, but the special also doesn't have enough time for that. So I don't know. That just kind of is my thoughts on Werewolf by Night. But I do think it's a great watch, and if you haven't watched it yet, I'd say this Halloween break it out and take a watch of it because it is definitely worth your time if you're willing to get the Disney Plus subscription, of course. At number 26, we have Ant-Man and the Wasp. Now, this is a movie that I think tried its best to up the antics from the first movie, but at the same time missed a couple of the points that made that first movie special. As this movie kind of plays with the idea of instead of people growing big and small, we have buildings, people, uh vehicles all growing and shrinking, which is kind of fun, and I really do think they use that really well, especially in the final chase sequence. I think the whole thing where they have the car shrinking and growing is really fun. And there's some great action moments in this movie, like you get with any Ant-Man movie, with the whole shrinking and growing aspect. And of course, you have to add some of the great comedy from this movie. Luis and the rest of the ex-cons are the best part of this movie. They are just so funny, and even like you would expect, Michael Douglas, Scott Lang, you get all of those characters that are just great and just amazing at what they do. But again, the big glaring problem of this film comes from the villain. I just don't think Ghost. I think Ghost is a fun character. She has this fun backstory about how Shield kind of abused her powers that she didn't ask for, and now she has a way to get rid of them, but it would kill Janet. And so there's this whole fight over her trying to use the device to make herself whole again, but at the same time they're trying to save Janet. So there's that whole thing that happens there, and they do kind of also resolve that plotline I think really quickly, especially because they save Janet and then Janet just cures Ghost. So feels like there was an easy way we could have solved this problem like a long time ago. And then there's also some of the other middle points of this movie that kind of like to drag out the pacing a little bit. And but overall, I think a pretty solid movie, and it definitely is very different from the movie that came directly before it, which was Infinity War, of course. At number 25, we have What If. Now, this is a show that I think had the potential to be so great, but Marvel just played it way too safe. With the What If concept, you can tell these crazy out there stories that people don't even think about, and it's kind of just like you change this one variable. It's like, for instance, what if T'Challa got abducted instead of Peter Quill? So now that we've had this happen, what else can happen because of that? And it arises for some fun moments, but and like from the what if in the comics, they have great moments like what if Miles Morales was Wolverine? Like things like that. They're like crazy out there ideas that you don't even think about, but it's fun to think about once you have the idea. And what if I think suffer from that idea is they tried to take that concept, place it in the MCU to kind of show us what the multiverse can be for future projects, but again, played it way too safe. There are a lot of episodes in here that just drag for me, but at the same time, there's some really high episodes. The couple episodes that I really like are the T'Challa Star Lord episode, the Doctor Strange episode of season one, the zombies episode, the season one finale, which is the crossover episode, and then the younger version of the Avengers that we see in episode two of the second season. Every other episode from that doesn't just feels like it either was playing the idea way too safe or had some glaring issues. Like there's episodes in here where we are telling entirely new stories, which is not the point of What If. And there's stories where we're suddenly now just having Captain Carter in basically every other episode, which I don't think she needs to be in every episode. I mean, I have nothing against Captain Carter, but I feel like the only overarching character of the series should be the Watcher. So I think, and the fact that this show is ending after only three seasons really just goes to show that Marvel kind of screwed up with this idea of this should be a show that should be able to last them like 20 seasons, but they just didn't really deliver what if can give you. At number 24, we have Hawkeye. Now, this is another very different type of MCU project, as this is a Christmas show that's also street level. So instead of fighting aliens or robots or anything like that, it's just a street level story where we're dealing with crime bosses and also just trying to Clint just trying to be there for his family for the holidays. That's fun. And there's a lot of great ideas you can play with this idea. Play with this idea, especially when they introduce Kate Bishop. She is just so fun in this role, and the story that they use Kate Bishop for is so fun. Clint has a great arc as well, and they pair it with some great things. Like I love Echo in the series, and there's a couple other fun characters. Like there's the LARPers who are also kind of fun, and but where the show kind of gives me my biggest frustration is what they did with Kingpin. They brought Kingpin into the show, but decided to use him as the big episode 5 plot reveal moment, and then so that all the fans go crazy for the finale. I wish that they just committed to Kingpin from the start and had him part of the whole season so that he could be doing stuff. Instead, he's relegated to one episode that just feels like you want so much more from the character because I mean, if you've seen Daredevil, you know how great Vincent D'Onofrio is as Kingpin, and this show just feels like they're trying to capture that, but they only gave him one episode to work with. So that's kind of one of my big hopes that eventually when Daredevil Born Again comes out, that they do Kingpin really well, like they used to do back with Daredevil. And there are some also great moments in this series that I really hope they carry through with. Like I love Kate Bishop, and I hope we get to see her again. And even the Rogers the Musical is also a great, funny first episode thing, and honestly still gets me laughing to this day. So there's that. At number 23, we have WandaVision. Now, WandaVision, I think, should kind of be the blueprint for what Marvel TV shows should be. They are stories that work as TV shows that I don't think could work as movies. Because WandaVision is a show that I don't think would work as a movie at all. Because the whole premise of the show is it's it's we're blipping through these different eras of sitcoms, which is so fun and allows for some very fun humor to play with the tropes and styles of these different shows. And they use it to tell a very real story about grief and moving on, which is so emotional. And then you pair that with Catherine Hahn as Agatha. I remember that for the entirety of WandaVision's run and even before the run of the show, everybody was spending all of their time theorizing that Agatha was going to be in this show, and then when she finally revealed herself, the internet lost it. It was just such a great time to be a Marvel fan, and this show was also really fun, especially because we were in pandemic at the time. So this was also a great time to finally get back to the MCU without having to rewatch all the old films to finally get something new. And there's also a lot of amazing set pieces. The only thing that does drive this movie down a little, the show, I mean, down a little bit, is that finale. As we have this great premise of all these sitcoms, but then when we shift into the finale, it's just battling a big sky battle, which we've seen in almost every MCU movie, which I think they could have done something so much better with the premise of make it like a superhero sitcom show, like a Disney Channel show or something, and play with that idea of a battle where they can't move that far because of the nature of the show. Like, there's fun ways they could play with that idea or blip into like 2000s era sitcoms or blip into different eras of like modern sitcom, and instead they didn't do that. So the finale also feels kind of like we returned back to traditional Marvel instead of sticking with the cool premise that this show had set up as its whole mojo up until this point. At number 22, we have Doctor Strange. Now, this movie always, I think, sails much lower than I want it to, as it has it has a lot going for it, as it's basically this magic story that basically put Inception level visuals inside of its film, and as a result it creates a really cool visual effect. And I just think also there's some great moments, like Benedict Cumberbatch kills it as Doctor Strange. I think he's just fun, and there's a lot of other great moments in this one. I love Tilda Swinton as the Ancient One, sorry, and some of the and Mads Mikkelsen as the villain. He is also kind of fun, and even Dormammu. The whole scene where Doctor Strange just goes Dormammu, I've come to bargain, is a really funny scene and is really cool. But my biggest problem always arises from Doctor Strange himself, as the arc they gave Doctor Strange in this movie is very reminiscent of Tony Stark's arc in the first Iron Man film, as we have a character who's lived his life a certain way his whole life, and then something happens that changes his worldview. He then goes on an adventure to kind of try to return back to that state of normal, but finds he can't go back to normal. So it always just feels like they took Iron Man's arc, shoved it in a blender with Inception, and that's kind of what Doctor Strange ended up being. Now, there are a lot of differences in that plot, but overall, I think Doctor Strange is a very fun watch, and it's definitely one of those that is really fun. And you have to remember, we're about out to enter the top 20, so we're starting to enter the era of Marvel films that's like very difficult to like rank separately from one another, because at this point all of them are pretty solid from almost every angle. At number 21, we have Captain America Civil War. Now, this is or as some people call it, Avengers 2.5. This movie is so incredibly great, as they found a very mature and real way to get our Marvel heroes to fight each other and make it believable. The whole Sokovia Accords incident is such a interesting idea, and they found such a great way to where you see where Cap's coming from and you see where Tony's coming from. And it's so great that even people are still arguing to this day of who actually won. Plus, you throw in some great moments. This is our first introduction to MCU Spider-Man, who is great. Black Panther makes his introduction here. Bucky makes his first return back to White Wolf status. And it just ends up as a really great, uh, how do I say, uh, it just ends up as a really great kind of mix of maturity, especially when you come to Zemo, who is also a really great villain. Because you have to really think, all these other Marvel villains, they have like powers and whatever. He's just a normal guy. He just manipulated the Avengers into fighting each other. And when you think about it, because he got the Avengers to break up in this movie, Thanos was able to win in Infinity War. So when you think about it, Zemo's plan resulted in the snap, which is crazy to think about that just this guy who has no powers that just had beef with the Avengers somehow caused half of life in the universe to disappear. And that's just crazy to think about. And this movie has also the really mature themes about how people deal with loss and how their Zemo was going to kill himself in that final act, and Black Panther had to stop it because he was not giving into the grief anymore. And that's just how you know this movie really was good. At number 20, we have I Am Groot, which I know some people don't count, but I'm going to. As I Am Groot is kind of a very fun outlier to the MCU because it's basically just these 5 minute shorts with Baby Groot doing random stuff, and that's basically the overall premise of this. And it's basically one of those things that's like if you want just like a quick laugh when you're feeling down or just need something to lighten your spirit on a cold Tuesday or something, this is probably what you would turn on, just watch an episode of this, and you'll usually be laughing and have fun by the end. They use it to also have some funny moments, like the Watcher narrating what Groot's doing. They have Groot showcasing how he became Baby Groot after he was planted in the pot. They have a couple of fun episodes where Rocket shows up. But basically, it's just a fun little mini saga that's pretty fun and funny, so it just ends up bringing us into the top 20 for that reason. At number 19, I have Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Now, this is another very different type of MCU project, as this one kind of deals with more martial arts kind of style of filmmaking and the kind of ideas and jokes you can get from that premise, and it's really good. As you have this really great villain who is suffering from the loss of his wife and just thinks he can get her back and wants to get his son and daughter in on it, but they see the problem was with his plan is so fun. The whole premise of Shang-Chi learning to take over the Ten Rings. You pair that with Aquafina, who's a pretty good comic relief character. You have Trevor Slattery coming back, who is also great in the comic relief department. And that final battle with uh, Shang-Chi and his dad, Wenwu, is such a great emotional fight because you can see where both men are coming from and you understand what both of them are seeing. And that's important. And then my big problem then comes is the second that the Wenwu fight is over, we then have a giant CGI fight with the Dweller in Darkness. Again, Marvel doing their big CGI fight sequence in the sky in a movie that's been martial arts up until this point. In fact, the martial arts stuff is also feels like they held back what could have been so great as they have their main actor who did a lot of his own stunts paired with they keep putting him on green screens like the bus sequence and the scaffolding sequence are all green screen fight sequences that you wish you could that you wish were not. And that's I think what just suffers because there's so much you can do with this style of filmmaking that I feel like the big budgets of Marvel kind of held this movie back because they just wanted to put CGI fight sequences everywhere, which they don't need to be everywhere in a movie like this. At number 18, we have the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special. Now, this is a very interesting um little special as when I first heard it was coming out and I saw the trailer, I thought they were joking that when the premise was that when the premise came out and I thought they were joking. Then I watched it and I was like, nope, that's the premise. And it just works because Guardians has set up this tone over its entire trilogy that the Guardians are very serious characters, but they also have this jokey component to them. And James Gunn found the way to mash those together so well. So they can blend characters, superheroes like the Guardians of the Galaxy with a plot line about how Mantis and Drax kidnap Kevin Bacon to give to Peter Quill as a Christmas present work because that's just what the Guardians would do because they don't know how Earth works. They don't know that they can't just do that. And Kevin Bacon's also just amazing in this special because they not only use this special to be like the funny Christmas thing you expected, but they use it to tell a very real story about what Christmas means to people and families. And they use it to expand our Guardians lore by finally introducing that Mantis and Peter are brother sister and a bunch of other fun little moments in this, plus the songs as well. Like everything you love about the Guardians films is in this special, and it's just hilarious. And I think that if you haven't already, you should totally break it out this Christmas because I mean, what are you gonna get from like a 70 millionth rewatch of Frosty or Rudolph when we have gems like this that are amazing and in a way, as long as you know who the Guardians characters are, you don't really have to have a full understanding of the movies to really enjoy this special. At number 17, we have The Avengers. Now, this is the biggest example of Marvel finding a way to do something that nobody else had done before. Bringing together all of these characters of varying degrees of tone and making it work. Like we have the serious Steve Rogers and the kind of arrogant billionaire Tony Stark and Bruce Banner, and we find a way to mesh them together into this one story and make it work. And we're able to keep all the wit and humor of Tony Stark without losing it because he's talking up to Captain America. And it just works because also they paired it with Tom Hiddleston, who's a great villain with the Chitauri army and all that. They have the big fight sequences that you expect from an Avengers film. And it just is so crazy to think that this is technically one of the movies that kickstarted the really connectivity of this universe because thanks to the Avengers taking off, we got all the other big connected movies. And it's just crazy to think that when this movie came out, every studio just instantly saw it as, oh, it's possible to create a connected universe of all these of different characters. So now we got to try that. So you know that this movie was really good when other studios looked at it and said, "Oh, we can make connected universes too if we do this." They just kind of those other studios just kind of forgot why this movie worked. So, yeah. At number 16, we have Black Panther Wakanda Forever, the MCU movie that was dealt probably the worst hand of all of these projects, as their lead actor, Chadwick Boseman, passed away before this movie could start shooting. And also, then COVID hit, and this movie just felt like it was not going anywhere. But Ryan Coogler found a way to make a movie that kind of launches Black Panther into a new area so that they can keep using the IP, but also using it as a tribute piece to Chadwick Boseman. And they use it to tell a heart wrenching story about what grief does to someone. And they use it to tell such a mature story that just tugs at your heartstrings. And when you watch it, it's really feels like if Chadwick was still here, he would have appreciated the work that Ryan Coogler did to honor his legacy. And you pair that as well with a great villain in the form of uh you pair it with a great villain who uh why am I forgetting his name all of a sudden? What is it? Namor, that's it. Um Namor is one of those villains that Ryan Coogler is great at creating because he's a bad person. He has this whole idea where he wants to take out mankind and all this, and he wants Wakanda to do it with him. And so obviously he's an evil villain who needs to be stopped, but he also has something to say. And in the end, he technically wins the moral battle and gets Wakanda to change their ideals. So that's really hard to do with a villain of you need to make someone that the audience is going to hate enough that make you want to stop them, but also give them a message that they convey and also make it make sense. And this movie just comes together to create such an experience that was so emotional to watch when I first did in the theaters. At number 15, we have Black Panther. Now, this is a movie that's so great, as this movie found a way to kind of blend these new ideals of taking us out of the America that we have spent basically all of the MCU in and putting it in a new setting of Wakanda and allowing to fully flesh out that world. We get to see all the technology they create, the traditions they have, and all this other great stuff blended with T'Challa learning to take over as Black Panther, but also learning that his father wasn't the perfect person he saw him as. And it just makes for such a good story. Again, like I mentioned with Namor, Killmonger is another one of those really great villains that they Ryan Coogler found a great way to put him in this movie, make him hateable enough to where you want to see him stopped, but he also has a message he wants to say. And in the end, he gets Wakanda to kind of idealize to him of that they spread their technology with the world. So Killmonger wins the moral battle, which is so great. Plus, you pair that with a great cast. Everyone in here is amazing. And as a result, you just get an MCU movie that blew everyone out of the water. And it just makes it so much sadder now that we're no longer going to see T'Challa, Chadwick Boseman as T'Challa, because he really nailed that role in a way that RDJ nailed Iron Man, you know? So, yeah. At number 14, we have Thor Ragnarok. Now, the Thor films up to this point have kind of been a little bit of all over the place. This movie found a way to push the boundaries of what humor can be in a superhero film, while at the same time telling a really groundedly good story. As so many of the jokes in this movie are still things I quote to this day, and it just makes this movie so fun to rewatch because you remember all the jokes and all the stuff they do with it. And they blend it with such a great story of using Hela to kind of bring up this idea of the dark past of Asgard that Odin's tried so hard to cover up that now Thor and Loki are paying the price for. And it's fun. And you pair that with some other great fun villains, like you have um, the Grandmaster, played greatly by Jeff Goldblum, who is just a great comedic villain for this film. You have of course, some of the other great additions to the cast. You have Corrigan here was his standout appearance. You have Valkyrie joining the crew, and Heimdall, of course. So there's a lot of great moments in this film, and Taika Waititi really did do a great job with this movie. And the other great thing about this movie is the Ragnarok scene where Asgard's destroyed. Like, you know Asgard's going to get destroyed because it's in the title of the film. But seeing it happen, they don't feel the need to make a joke in that scene. They correctly found the way to use jokes, and then when they need to be serious, they flip the movie and it is serious. That's kind of the magic of this film, and that's also what was missing all the way back down in Love and Thunder. So, yeah. At number 13, we have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Now, this is a very interesting kind of sequel as the Guardians are now already formed. They already have the thing together. Now we're going to test kind of their connection as a family. And this movie found a really great way to tell that story of this found family and how they really do care for each other. As there's a sequence in this movie near the end where the characters are talking about getting off of the planet, and they're talking about how they have to go back for Quill, and Nebula's trying to convince them not to, and she says that they are not friends, and Drax responds, they're family, which is such emotional coming from Drax, especially because he's the character that's all supposed to be like not kind of emotional, and he's just supposed to be like like he's supposed to be all muscle basically, which is a big thing. And you pair that with the great side adventure you have with Rocket, Groot, and Yondu, with their whole Ravager thing with Kraglin, who is also fun. And of course, you get the amazing Guardians soundtrack and all the other great stuff with Peter. The only big thing I guess I have against this film is I think they took a little bit too long to reveal that Ego is a villain. I think that if they revealed Ego way earlier in the film, they could have done a way better job telling the story of Peter now has his father who is kind of doing a bad thing, but can but is he gonna choose his father, or is he gonna who is his biological family, or is he gonna choose the Guardians, this family he's found through his adventures? But because they wait too long to reveal Ego, I think that kind of gets lost because we end up stuck with like Ego only being a villain for the third act, which at that point we're only like 30 minutes from the end of the movie, and so there's not enough time for Ego to be evil enough to kind of have that plot line, which I think would have really elevated this movie probably even higher than it is right now. At number 12, we have Captain America the Winter Soldier. Now, this is a lot of people's favorite MCU movie, and I can see the appeal with it. It does a really fun job of blending Captain America and kind of telling the story of now he's in the modern day. So what does that mean for him? And that's kind of some fun things. Plus, you pair that with Black Widow, who's always great. You add Falcon into the mix for this movie, Nick Fury, and they also have Bucky, who is now the Winter Soldier and is a villain, which is also so emotional for Cap because, especially in that final fight scene where he's fighting Bucky, he's fighting his friend and he doesn't want to hurt him, which is such an emotional scene where Cap is like, I'm not going to fight you. And they have the whole I'm with you to the end of the line sequence, which is so great and emotional. And you pair that with all the other great set pieces of this movie, the great emotional beats of this movie, and it really is a top tier MCU film. But at the same time, I guess I'm just like a lot of other stuff better than this movie. And if I have the choice, I do pick these other stuff more than it. Not to say that I don't like this movie. I think it's great. I just think that in my own eyes, there are other movies that go above it for other reasons that I'm going to get into as we move into those movies. At number 11, we have Spider Man Homecoming. Now, this movie is so shocking that they were able to pull it off because this is the third Spider Man that we're getting, that third Spider Man actor who's coming out within like a decade. So it's crazy to think that they found a way to make a third Spider-Man trilogy, but also make it different because this movie targeted the thing that, in my opinion, was missing from the other two films, and that's the high school aspect of Peter Parker. Because we never got a chance to see that with Toby and Andrew. So this movie opened itself to doing like a John Hughes kind of style, where we have Peter Parker just going about his high school days, dealing with bullies, dealing with crushes, dealing with homecoming, and it makes for such an interesting idea for a superhero film. And then you pair that with other great moments like Peter trying to figure out what kind of superhero he wants to be, where he wants to take on bigger threats, but Tony doesn't think he's ready yet. So there's that whole kind of debate that he has with the suit about the suit later in the film. And that's also such a great sequence where he has to earn it back. That's just great. And then you pair that with Vulture, who is amazingly done in this film. I think Michael Keaton has a knack for that first comic book movie characters, and he nailed Vulture. And it just also makes that movie so much greater because there's a moment in this film that I always stood out to me very well was the moment where Peter goes to pick up Liz for the homecoming dance, and it's Michael Keaton who answers the door. And at first, it's shocking because you think, oh, he found his girlfriend's house. But no, that's his daughter. And it's such an emotional sequence, especially when they're in the car and Vulture figures out Peter's Spider-Man. Like that sequence is so well done that really just puts like the shiver down your spine, the same way Spider-Man's spine is shivering in the moment. So I think this movie was just done super duper well, and it definitely was a great surprise, especially because Spider-Man is my favorite superhero. So happy to finally get a win for the character, right? And now bringing us into the top 10, we have Moon Knight. Now, I had a lot of fun with Moon Knight. Oscar Isaac is such a good actor, and with the idea of Moon Knight, he's basically playing three different characters in this show, and he has to switch through them like on a dime, as when he's talking in a conversation, he could suddenly just go from Mark to Steven and back to from Steven to Mark. And it's such a great way to play with that idea. Plus, they play with the Egyptian mythology you can get from this premise of taking our characters to the Duat and kind of doing all that stuff and having all these other big fight sequences between our gods, which is such a great sequence. And I really love how in the earlier episodes they always play with this idea that Steven doesn't know what Mark does when Mark takes over the body. So they have this really weird, almost conjoined kind of first couple episodes where we're with Steven, and then all of a sudden our characters black out, and then when they wake up again, there's something new happened, and they don't know what happened. Especially because, Jake Lockley doesn't get introduced until the final episode. So there's also that third personality that's there that we don't get to see until later. And then the other great moment of this is you pair Ethan Hawke in here as the main villain who nails that role. Ethan Hawke is one of my favorite actors, and this role I always come back to because I think he played the scary part of his character so well, and it just pairs so well with the kind of different personalities of our Moon Knight character because we have Stephen Grant who's scared of a lot of things and Mark Spector who's not afraid of anything. So they get to play with that idea. And I know there's a lot of people who kind of don't like this show, but I had a really great time with it. So that's why it ended up at the bottom of my top 10. At number 9, we have Iron Man. Now, this movie I always have to pay respect to because without it, the MCU wouldn't exist. And without the rest of the MCU on his shoulders, this movie was basically just Kevin Feige, Jon Favreau, and Robert Downey Jr. just making a movie that follows the traditional hero journey arc and tells a really good story. Robert Downey Jr. from an early, even this early, nailed the idea of Tony Stark, how he's this big billionaire playboy, but he also has a heart. And that's the greatness of Tony Stark. And you pair that with a bunch of other great characters like Rhodey, Pepper, you got Coulson in there, and it's all great. The one thing that does always bring this movie a little down for me is the villain. I just think Obadiah Stane has a little bit of an issue to him, especially in some of his final battle sequences. I just think it's kind of weird in a lot of senses, but at its core, he's great. This movie has, if it weren't for this movie being such a smash hit, the MCU probably wouldn't have happened. So for all those reasons, I just have to give this movie so much praise because, well, without it, I probably wouldn't be making this video right now. So thank you, Iron Man. At number 8, we have Avengers Infinity War. Now, this movie achieved something that seemed impossible at the time it somehow found a way to merge together all of these different characters from the Infinity Saga together into one movie as they go up against Thanos for control of the Infinity Stones, and they made it work. Like, that's crazy. The fact that I remember when this movie was first coming out, the hype for it was so real, and it was a great time to be a superhero fan. As a result, the movie also has a very interesting idea where, because it has way too many heroes, it decides to tell its story through the villain as we follow Thanos as he collects each one of the stones, and it's kind of more about how the heroes are trying to stop him and failing. And there's a lot of greatness in that idea. And it also leads to the big shocker of the film. Thanos wins. He completes his gauntlet, does the snap, half of all life in the universe dies. And that scene where characters are slowly turning into dust is so emotional. I remember when I first watched this movie, there was a big fear in everyone's eyes that Thanos just won and our favorite characters are disappearing. Like, that felt like almost like someone actually hurt us. And that was shocking at the time. And it just is such a great movie. My only big thing with this movie, which is why I don't have it any higher, is because of the nature of the story of how there's so many characters and Thanos is kind of our framing device for the movie. Some of our characters kind of disappear for big portions. Like, we have the opening sequence, which kind of includes our characters like Tony Stark, Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, all that. And then when they get abducted by the Q ship, they kind of disappear for a very big portion in the middle of the movie. Same with a couple of the other characters that are in that cold open that we don't see for a little while. But other than that, this movie was phenomenal. And while it might be a better movie than the other top 7, I just like the top 7 a lot better than this movie. So at number 7, we have Ant-Man. Now, after so many MCU movies where the complaint has been they feel the exact same, we have a superhero becoming a superhero and then big CGI fight in the sky. Ant-Man starts with a very interesting, different idea of being a heist movie, being all about how most of the movie is Scott Lang learning the ins and outs of the place he's trying to break into and learning the Ant-Man tech to break into said place. And it leads for a very different style of MCU movie because instead of teaming up for a big fight, it's teaming up for a heist. And then the heist finishes, and then we do kind of return back to that classic MCU big CGI fight, but they found a way to make it unique to this movie by having Ant-Man and Yellow Jacket fight on a Thomas the Tank Engine set because they're really small. And that's funny because they're playing with the good you can get from this premise. Plus, you pair it with a hilariously done cast. Paul Rudd as Ant Man is so funny. You have the ex cons, which I mentioned before. You have even Hope, Hank, even Darren Cross gets some laughs out of me. So overall, this movie blends together to be a very different type of MCU experience. And for someone like me who really does enjoy heist films, this film sucks me in and really gets me hooked on this idea. And I'm really excited. I'm really happy that this movie existed because, well, I mean, Paul Rudd is also one of my favorite Avengers. So I mean, what can I say? At number 6, we have Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, I remember when this movie was first coming out, everybody thought Marvel lost their mind. They are going from making pretty normal, grounded superheroes out of Captain America, Thor, Iron Man, and they're going to do a movie where two of our main characters are a raccoon and a tree. But they gave the movie to James Gunn, and he found the magic of a movie where everything works, from the casting, the music, the story, the settings. Everything in this movie works. There are so many jokes in this that I still quote to this day. The soundtrack is something I still listen to this day, and that story, oh, the story gets me so much every time. The whole idea of Peter just looking for somewhere in the universe to belong, and how he finds it with this group of people that he wasn't expecting to like and who weren't expecting to like him. And they found a way to make this movie so emotional to the point where Groot can say a line as sappy as "We are Groot," and the entire theater tears up. This is a movie that doesn't just happen. Kevin Feige gave James Gunn free run to make a movie that he was passionate about, and as a result, it turned out to be one of the greatest films, not just in MCU, but superheroes in general. And as a result, it led to James Gunn running DC. So, if the DCU has any films from James Gunn that are anything like this film, Marvel might be in trouble in future years. Before we move into the top 5, I just want to take a quick moment to remind you that if you like what you see here on the channel, just drop a like down below and subscribe you so you can see more videos like this if you enjoy it. And if you feel up to the task, give me your ranking of all 47 MCU projects, from the movies to the specials to the shows. And if that's a little too hard for you, just give me what your top 5 are and what your bottom 5 are. At number 5, we have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. The Guardians trilogy is one of the best in the MCU, as James Gunn found what worked about these characters and expanded on it. And for the third film, which is very much the closure film of the trilogy, he found a way to tell this great story about how the Guardians kind of have matured over time. And they tell it really greatly through Rocket, who has this whole story about where you learn about his backstory with the High Evolutionary. No, it's not the High Evolutionary, is it? It's the High Evolutionary, and his kind of backstory about how he was created and then was tossed aside. And once you know that, rewatching all the other Guardians films, you see a new side of Rocket that you've never seen before. Paired that with some of the other great moments where you have Peter Quill, who doesn't know how to move forward as the Guardians leader from what's happened to him in Infinity War. You pair that with Nebula learning to move into a leadership role, Drax trying to make up for his days of losing his daughter, and you end up getting a movie that closes out a trilogy, but at the same time leaves more to be desired so that they can start a new trilogy and still get you to watch it. This film accomplished the impossible of of striving above the post Endgame Marvel fatigue to deliver a product that everybody wanted and everybody cherished. And that also probably has something to do with the fact that this film was actually written to be released back in Phase 3 and the start of Phase 4. And then James Gunn got fired, so it got pushed to here. But hey, it just meant that we had a longer wait, and it meant that the reward was all that more was all better. At number 4, we have Loki. Now, when this show first got announced, I was the biggest how do you say hater of the idea, as Loki's death in Infinity War was already so emotional, and now they were just bringing him back, and it was not even going to be Loki, it was going to be the variant of him that escaped during the time heist. I thought this was going to be a flop, but then I watched it, and this movie, this show, I should say, found a new way to use the character in a way that we've never seen before. As it took Loki, who, but keep in mind, this variant of Loki was 2012 Loki, not even going through everything he did post Avengers. And they used this to kind of show a deep dive into Loki and kind of figure out what made Loki special and how can we play with that. And this show worked with that idea through its entire first season, doing this good cop, bad cop, buddy cop thing, which worked really well, paired with you have Sylvie, who's a great addition, and so much of this show worked, especially with that big finale reveal of the He Who Remains. And then season 2 came out. And season 2, I was expecting to like it, and I ended up loving it. I think I love it probably a little better than season 1 even, as they used what worked in season 1 and expanded on that. They gave some of the characters in season 1 that had nothing to do big plot arcs. They gave Loki so much more to do, and that finale episode where he sacrifices himself to hold the multiverse together is such a good end for that character. And it really just makes you realize that Loki is one of those characters that can be on whatever side of he needs to be on and always tell a good story. And I think Loki season 2 works this well because it's one of the only Marvel projects post Endgame that had zero rewrites or reshoots. They had a plan right from the start. They stuck with it all the way through, and so it doesn't feel like there's anything missing from the script or anything that got cut out, because everything that they wanted to show in this series is there. And it just makes for such a great experience that I loved every second of. At number 3, we have Avengers Endgame. The movie that Infinity War was great, Endgame had the almost impossible task of not only having to top Infinity War, but also end 10 years worth of character arcs. As this is the movie where we finally get finales to Tony, Cap, Natasha. You even get some finales for other characters like Wanda and Peter Quill, Spider-Man, and you end up getting a movie that somehow managed to do the impossible of bringing together all of these characters once again and tell such a gripping finale. And the first hour of this movie is great too, because I'm a big sucker for time travel stories. So the whole first act of this movie, where they're time traveling back to the previous movies to collect the Infinity Stones, is a lot of fun for me personally. But then they get to that last hour, which is the final battle, and all these characters coming together. It's such a great scene. That scene where Captain America is the only one left on the battlefield, and he's standing up to go face Thanos' army, and he thinks he's all alone. And then he hears Sam in his ear as all the portals open. That sequence made my theater erupt when I first saw this. This movie doesn't even feel like a movie, and more like it was an event. And it's even crazier to think that this movie is nearly 5 years old, and it still holds up as not only a great finale, but as a great movie. And the fact that so many people dropped off the MCU after this movie, I can totally respect, because this movie was just everything you wanted in a Marvel superhero movie and more. But while this movie might, like I said with Infinity War, while this movie might be better, there are still two movies that I like a little bit more than Endgame. So let's get into them. At number 2, we have Spider-Man No Way Home. Now, I mentioned it a couple times throughout this video, but Spider-Man is my favorite superhero. Not Marvel superhero, superhero. Spider-Man is just has something about him that I've just always loved. That canny, kind of punny humor, the weird rogues gallery he comes across, the amazingness of his stories, and all of that. And I first came into the Spider-Man thing a lot around the time that Tom Holland first started in the MCU. And so I watched Tobey and Andrew's movies and I respected them, but I always had a love for Tom's movies because, like Stan Lee said, Tom is the most comic accurate version of Spider-Man that we've seen on the live action screen. And this movie, when it first came out, didn't even feel like a movie. It felt like a love letter to Spider-Man fans of all generations. Of you have all of the people that love Tobey Maguire from back in the early 2000s. You have all the people that grew up with him in 2012 when they watched Andrew Garfield, and then all the people that joined the MCU train like I did for Tom Holland. And they brought all these characters together to not only tell a great story, but also re kind of fix or end stories from other movies. Because in some cases, there were plot lines from Andrew and Toby's films that either were unclear or never got resolved. So as a result, this movie takes those and finds a way to end them. And this movie just feels like everything you would want in a superhero movie because, like I mentioned a lot earlier in this video, you can use fan service in a movie correctly because here, Toby Andrew and the multiversal villains, they're not cameos, they're characters. And it just so helps that they're played by actors who played them before. And this is just everything I want in a Spider-Man movie is right here in this film. And while some of the story moments might be a little weak, I'm always going to come back to this movie because it not only is my favorite Spider-Man movie, it is one of my favorite superhero movies because it touches a special place in my heart that only a Spider-Man film could realistically touch. But there is still one more film above that. And if you know the MCU, you probably know which film that is. At number one, the most recent MCU film to release, Deadpool and Wolverine. Everything I said about Spider-Man is also true about Deadpool and Wolverine. The X-Men films are, for how wacky that connected universe is, they're an era of Marvel films that I grew up watching. The X-Men and Hugh Jackman as Wolverine was one of my first exposures to superhero media, and so the X-Men always have a special place in my heart. And you pair that with other Fox Marvel movies that have been lost to time. The Blade movies, the Blade movies, the Daredevil and Elektra films, the Fantastic Four films, all parts of Marvel media that were forgotten about when the MCU became so popular. And this film found a way to bring all those together, and like No Way Home, made them characters, not cameos. And this movie is all about legacy and closure. And even the things in this film you would think would be fan service have meaning. Hugh Jackman is not in the yellow Wolverine suit because that's what fans have been wanting for 10 years. There's a reason behind it. And the jokes are so funny. I went to see this on opening night with a bunch of my friends, and it was the best theater experience we have had since since No Way Home. And No Way Home was our first great theater experience post Endgame. So this was an event. We had such a great time in this movie, and as a result, this movie comes out as my number one. So there you guys have it, my ranking of all 47 MCU projects. Like I said, if you guys want to take your shot at ranking all these projects, leave your rankings in the comments down below. And if that's too hard, just give me your top 5 and your bottom 5. Thank you guys all very much for watching this video. If you stuck all the way through to the end, then that means you probably like what you saw here. So maybe consider dropping a like and subscribing. But until next time, I hope to see you guys in the next one. Bye!